Specifically, we're going to focus on flat tire changes today, as well as bike washing and just preventative maintenance on your bikes for just future. So raise your hand if you've ever changed a flat tire before on a bike. So 3 of you, 4 of you. You can lower that halfway. I'm just kidding. Okay, so you have a basic understanding of how it works. We're just going to run through quickly just sort of the anatomy of the wheel really quick, just to give you an understanding of the key words I'm going to use to describe things when I do the flat change. So obviously this is the tire, pretty self-explanatory. Inside of the tire here, there is a tube. Not on this bike, so we're going to have to grab another bike because I'm now realizing this bike is tubeless. So we don't really want to change a flat on a bike without a tube. So let's grab another one. Realizing your bike is tubeless already?
We can poke a hole in there.
That's in 102. This is 102.
How do you change if you have a flat and a tubeless, what do you do?
So on a flat and tubeless, you can put a tube inside of it.
Okay.
Inside of a tubeless tire, there is a liquid latex sealant that prevents the tire from going flat if something were to puncture through the tire, up to a certain size of hole, right? So usually it's like 1 inch, usually depending on where it is in a tire. That sealant will seal that hole. If it doesn't seal and you're left with a flat, you can just put a tube inside of it and then continue riding. There's also, not to get too complicated, there's also tire plugs that you can put in. It's a little rubber, kind of like, it looks like a bacon strip almost. You would put it inside of the hole that's not sealing. It actually chemically reacts with the sealant and will create a seal up to a certain size. But that's like more advanced sort of stuff. We're really going to focus on just changing flat tires and that sort of thing. So going back, obviously this is the tire. Inside of the tire there is a tube. This is the rim. This part here, this is what holds the tire. On the rim itself, there's 2 aspects of what holds the tire. There's the bead of the tire and the hook of the rim. So the bead of the tire is what actually hooks into the hook in the rim, and that's what creates that's what allows the tire to be held in place. And then obviously the pressure is what holds it there from the tube. So when we get a flat, I'm gonna take this out, I'm gonna take all the air out. So you're most likely gonna hear a sound similar to this. You're gonna feel your tire is very soft. When you get a flat, obviously pull over to the side of the road. We're gonna do the rear wheel specifically because the rear wheel has the gearing on it. That's the more complicated wheel to take off. But the front wheel is exactly the same, other than the fact that you don't have to take the gear out to drop the wheel. Okay, so we have a flat, our tire is completely flat. The first thing we're gonna do is take the tire, the wheel off of the bike. To do that, the easiest way is to shift into your hardest gear in the back. The reason we do that is so when we put the wheel back in, we know where to guide the chain onto the cog. We know, okay, the chain on the cog, derailleur is set to the last cog, so that way when we put it back in, we know exactly where to put it. So, a bike like this that has a clutch, I'm just going to engage it so it makes it easier to take the wheel off. So this is a through axle bike. So there's different types of axles in bikes that hold wheels in. There's specifically 3. There's through axle, there's quick release, and there's also nutted. Depending on the bike that you have will depend on what tools you need to remove the wheel. With a through axle, normally it's going to be an Allen key to remove it. So a through axle is an axle that goes straight through and threads in on the other side. You'll find it a lot on higher end bikes, bikes with disc brakes, that sort of thing. Quick release is self-explanatory. It's just an axle that has a quick release mechanism. The wheel will fall out once you take the quick release off. And then obviously a nutted axle you'll find on lower end bikes, older bikes. It's just 2 nuts on either side. You're going to need a wrench to take off. So with the through axle, I'm just using an Allen key on this side here to remove it. I've unthreaded it, and then I have removed the wheel, and the wheel is just going to drop right out. This is the through axle here. It was threaded in onto the other side here, and I basically pulled it out. Again, if it were a quick release, I would just undo the quick release, and the same thing would happen. The wheel would fall out. The difference there is the quick release will stay inside of the hub because it's held in by 2 nuts on either side. If it was a nutted axle, same thing. You would undo the nutted axle a little bit, the wheel would fall out, the two nuts on either side would stay the same. But if you have a through axle, you got to take it out completely. So just be aware of where you're putting this when you are changing your flat. You don't want to lose that, or you're not going to be able to put your wheel back in. So we'll run through that again, so taking the wheel off. So if this were a normal derailleur and it didn't have a clutch, what I would have to do is basically pull the derailleur back like this to allow the wheel to come out. It's kind of an odd bike because it has a clutch. Basically what a clutch does is it limits the movement like this to allow it to hold the chain better, because it's a one by gear on the front. So it has no front derailleur to keep the chain from bouncing off. So how it keeps chain retention, and it has a very stiff mechanism in here that prevents movement like this. Our goal is to get this cage out of the way so we can pull the cage back like this, but it's very difficult for me to do that. So this one has actually a mechanism that holds that in place. But same philosophy, basically I'm going to pull the derailleur back like this. The wheel is going to come out. You're just going to take the chain out of the cog, and your wheel is out. We'll show you on a couple different other bikes just to get you sort of used to how it works from bike to bike, but basically it's all the same concept. You want to get the derailleur out of the way. It allows you to drop the wheel out, and then now you have your wheel. So what do we do when we have our wheel out? Well, obviously, if there's still a little bit of air left in the tire, which there might be, you want to let all the air out. And so now the key to take the tire off, we can do this without tools if we really tried, but we're going to use what's called tire levers. Tire levers are basically these little plastic levers that you're going to fit into the bead of the tire and actually pull the bead off of the rim with. You're basically using these as leverage to pull the bead. How we get to that point is we are going to push the tire to the center of the rim. So we have the bead of our tire here. And you can see on this side it's actually not moving. It's going to be very difficult to try and take the tire off if the bead of the rim is still attached to the hook, or the bead of the tire, sorry, is still attached to the hook of the rim. So what we want to do is we want to actually physically push that bead over to the center. Now we can see that there's a gap between the bead of the tire and the hook of the rim. So we're just going to go around the tire and basically push the bead of the tire into the middle of the rim. And that'll create the most amount of slack in our tire and allow us to take it off very easily. So now we've done that, we've pushed the bead of the tire to the center of the rim. We're going to take our tire lever. We're going to start close to the valve here. We're going to put the tire lever into under the bead of the tire, and we're just basically going to pull it over like this. And then once we have a little lip of the tire over the rim, we're basically going to slide the tire lever around the rim, and you can see that half the bead is coming off there. Okay? Now we're at a stage now where we can do one of two things. We can take the tube out and replace it, or we can actually do a good thorough check and check what caused the flat. So how we're going to do that is we're actually going to physically take the whole tire off, and to do that, again, you can use your tire lever, but we're going to use the hand method here. Basically, you just want to pinch an area of the tire and sort of roll your thumb and allow the bead to roll over. Because we've created all this slack with the tire having it halfway off, this makes it a lot easier of a job to just roll the tire off the rim completely. Some people will tell you that you don't need to do this step. You can just basically take the tube out, which is this part right here, and replace it with a new one. The reason we want to do this is we want to get you comfortable with doing all sorts of methods, because you don't know if you have something stuck in your tire, and you want to be able to check the tire thoroughly to make sure that if there is a thorn or something like that, piece of glass, something like that stuck in the tire, you want to be able to take it out so that you don't get another flat with the spare tube that you put in. So we're going to set our rim aside. Now we have our tube here and our tire. So this is done. There's no real way that we can check this. If you guys have like hand pumps or things like that, you can sort of spend a little bit of time to inflate the tube and check where the hole is. Depending on where the hole is, will tell you what kind of flat it got. So if the hole was on the top of the tube, for example, something punctured through the top of the tire and caused that to go flat, so we know to check our tire. If there was a hole on the bottom, then it is something to do with the rim, either what's called the rim strip, which is this part here, this tape here, This tape protects the tube from what's called the nipples, this part here of the rim that holds the spoke, from allowing the tube to go into the holes, because there's actually little holes in here. That's how you put the nipples in, and causing it to go flat. So if there's a hole in the bottom, there's most likely something to do with the rim strip. So you just kind of want to check that to make sure it's not off to the side or anything like that. And then the third type of flat is called a pinch flat. So that'll be very distinguishable as well, because it looks like two punctures side by side, almost like a snake bite. It'll most likely be on the bottom again. If there's two little holes side by side, then you know it was a snake bite. So what a snake bite is you hit a square edge, curb, pothole, something like that, at low pressures or very high speeds. It basically caused the tire to compress, and it compressed against the rim and basically punctured it like that. The rim is my thumbs. It punctured the tire, or the tube, sorry, against the side of the rim and caused those two snake bite type punctures. So if you do have a pinch flat, it's most likely that you're under pressure or you hit something very fast and just had really bad luck. There is a fourth type. It's called a blowout. That'll be pretty self-explanatory. The whole tube, the side of the tube will just be exploded out. It'll be a very loud bang. That's something that most likely due to when you are installing the tube, for example, and you do it wrong. That could cause a blowout, or you cut your sidewall, which is this part here of the tire. You put a large gash in this from a rock or something on it, maybe you're riding trails, and the tube is exposed out, and then because there's nothing holding that tube in for the pressure, it just explodes out. But that'll be very self-explanatory. When that happens, you're gonna notice that right away. Okay, so our tube is done. Let's just say we had something go through the top of the tube and we were able to find the hole in the top of the tube by checking the tube. What we want to do is we want to now check the tire. So what I do is I check the top of the tire while running my fingers inside of the tire to feel if there's any sharp objects. Obviously be careful when you're doing this. You want to do it slow, because if there is a piece of glass or a thorn, you obviously don't want to cut your hand while you're doing it. So I will check the top of the tire and run my hands through the tire at the same time and just check for anything. And if I do find something in the tire, I'm gonna either try and like pry it out with my fingernail, or try and push it out from the other side if it's not too sharp. Or if you have some sort of multi-tool or something, try and find like a little Allen key on the multi-tool and just sort of pry it out. Do your best. If you have a little flathead or something on the multi-tool, you can sort of pry that thorn, piece of glass, anything out like that. Obviously, if it's a piece of glass, you also want to check around the tire more, because glass never really comes in single little bits. It's always scattered all on the ground. So maybe just that one piece made it through the actual tire, but there might be other pieces on the tire itself that haven't made it all the way through. That way you want to just pull them out so that they don't make it all the way through, because as you're riding, if you're not aware, the glass will sort of dig its way in until it punctures your tire again. So if it is glass that you find, you want to just really thoroughly check the tire and make sure there's no additional pieces of glass that will make their way through the tire. So we've checked our tire. It's all good. We've removed all the debris from it. What we're going to do is we're going to put half the tire back on the rim. So we're going to find our valve hole, which is the hole in the rim where the valve will go through. It's just right here. And most tires are also directional as well. So they will have a direction of rotation. It will say on the side of the tire which direction it should roll. So there will be an arrow somewhere, most likely near where the logos are. So all right here, there is, I don't know if you can all see that, there is a rotation mark here. So it shows rotation and a little arrow. So we know the tire is supposed to rotate this way. So you always know that your gearing is on the right side of the bike, or what we call the drive side. So you're just going to follow the rotation. So if the wheel is rolling this way on a bike, then we want to mark the tire up rolling this way with the tire. You find the logo of the tire itself, and you're going to put that in the center of the valve hole. The reason you do that is in the future, if you ever get a flat, and you can see where the flat occurred on the tube, you can correspond that to where the logo is, because the valve will be at the logo. So you can check with the tube on the valve, and you can check on the tube itself where the hole happened, and then if it was let's say it was a puncture through the top of the tube, you can quickly go find, okay, my valve was here where the logo is, so the hole in the tube is over there, so I'm going to check the tire in this location. Just makes it easier for you to find those types of things in the future, as well as most of the time the pressure indicators and things like that are going to be close to the logo as well. So if you're ever wondering what to pump your tire up to, you can find where the pressure is. And then the third part, it looks really pro as well. So we always like to do that. So we're just going to find the valve on our rim. We're going to put the tire on here, and so it's all centered. So basically what I'm going to do now is I'm basically going to roll the tire, and I'm putting half the bead here onto the rim. So I'm going to start here, and I like to call this the power position. So it's kind of like a little bit of a squat, and so you can rest the tire sort of in this position and not have to hold it on the ground. And we're basically trying to get this part of the bead onto the tire, okay? So the easiest way to do that is actually use your palms. If you try and use your fingers, you only have this amount of leverage. If you use your palms, you have that amount of leverage. So leverage is the key to life. You sort of are just gonna roll it on like that. So that's a good sound when you hear that. That basically means the tire is, or at least half the tire is on. So we have half our tire on. We're gonna get to our tube now. Let's say you have a spare tube in your saddlebag. It's gonna be all rolled up. It's not gonna have any sort of pressure to it inside of it. You're gonna unravel it. And basically what you're gonna do is you're gonna put a little bit of pressure in the tire. How you can do that, let's say if you're using CO2s, for example, which is a type of method that you can use for inflating the tire. You're basically gonna open the valve and you can actually blow a little bit of air into it, kind of like a life jacket or something like that. And it will give it some shape. You want to give the tube a little bit of shape because it's going to make it easier to put the tube in the tire. Once you give it a little bit of shape, obviously we're going to install the valve into the hole, like that. We're going to roll the tire over like this. And basically now our job is to just tuck the tire into the, or tuck the tube, sorry, into the tire and the rim. So we're going to go around and I'm basically just pushing up and then in at the same time. And I'm making sure that the tube is not going to twist like this as well. You want to put it in as straight as possible. That's another reason why you're also going to put a little bit of pressure in it, because it just helps with holding that shape. So now that we've gotten our tube inside of the tire, we're basically going to put the other half in. So same technique that we used before to get the tire on initially onto the rim. We're just going to roll the tire around get that bead of the tire onto the rim itself. There will be a section that you get to at the end that's going to be difficult. It's not as easy to roll that up. There's two ways you can go about doing this. You can use tire levers, but you have to be super careful, because what can happen if you use a tire lever is it can pinch the tube as you're lifting it in, and then you're back to square one. So the technique we use is the same technique like I showed you before. It's the power stance. So what I do is I start at the top of the tire here, and I'm actually going to roll my thumbs down like this, and I'm going to hold the tire, and that creates slack in the tire. I'm going to get to the power position here, and then you can just roll the tire on, and it's super simple. Now, in all fairness, this is a very easy tire to put back on. We're going to find a little bit more of a difficult one to do as another example, but it's the same concept for all tires. Sometimes I encounter tires in the shop that are difficult and I have to use a tire lever, but 90% of the time, you can use your hands if you use the right technique. So now that we've gotten to this step here, we're at the inflation stage now. So what we want to do is we want to check, before we inflate, that our tube is all the way up inside of the tire. How we do that is we're just going to basically push the tire aside, and we're just going to check that there's no tube exposed. So I'm basically just looking for this to see this strip inside of the rim here, and that basically means that the tube is up inside of the tire and it's going to be safe to inflate. If the tube itself was in this area here or like outside of this tire when I pulled this back, if we were to inflate, especially very quickly, that tube would just basically expand outwards because there's nothing holding it in, and it's going to blow out. So we don't want that. So we're just going to thoroughly check around to make sure that there's no tube exposed before we inflate. Do this really quickly, and then we have no tube, and it's only ever going to be on the side that you put the tire or the tube in, right? So this side, obviously, we had half of it on already, so it's not going to be exposed on that side. It's only going to be exposed on the side that we put the tube in. So now that we're at the inflation stage here, what I like to do is I like to take the valve here and just sort of push it in and out. That means that the tube in this area is also going to be not exposed It just basically means it's going to be easier for inflation, and then the valve is also going to line up straight. If you weren't able to push this all the way, you might want to sort of manipulate the tire around a little bit so that you are able to push the valve up and down that freely. So I have to get a pump, which we're going to need. So there's obviously a few different ways to inflate the tire, especially on the side of the road. If you're at home, use your pump. It's going to be way easier. If you're on the side of the road, obviously if you're carrying a tube, you're carrying some sort of inflation device to inflate the tube, whether that be CO2 or a mini hand pump, for example. It's the same concept. You're basically putting air into the tire. With the mini hand pump, you're going to be spending a little bit extra time on the side of the road to inflate it, but it's multi-use instead of a CO2. Everyone here know what a CO2 is? It's just compressed air in a little canister.
Yeah, I saw it last time.
Yeah. It basically allows you to quickly inflate the tire on the side of the road. The only downside to CO2 is it's single use. So if you mess up, you're down to CO2. And the other thing as well is because it's compressed air, it'll only last an entire 24 hours before it goes flat. So it's just a measure to get you home so that you can inflate it with a normal pump. So we've put our valve on. Basically, we're just going to inflate away. A little bit of a crappy pump. When you're on the side of the road, for example, and you don't know what pressure you're going to because your either your CO2 or your mini pump doesn't have a gauge on it, you can just check the side of the tire. It's always good to familiarize yourself with what pressure feels like what. So if you're at home and you have your pump, and you have a gauge on it, when you pump it up to the pressure that you like or whatever recommended pressure is on the side of the tire, just give it a feel. You'll know what it feels like so that when you are inflating it on the side of the road, you can sort of give it another feel and be like, okay, that's very similar to what I'm used to, so I know I'm at the right pressure. Again, when you're using a mini pump, you're very rarely ever going to get to a very high pressure because it's very difficult. You're doing a lot of strokes. So you are sort of trying to get it to a reasonable pressure to get you home.
I have a question.
Yes.
I've noticed that you're pumping the air while the tire is off. Is it better to do it then or put the wheel back on and then pump?
I'd say it's better to do it off because in case there's an issue with the tire, let's say there's still something stuck inside of the tire and it goes flat, you're not putting it back in and taking it back out again, for example, right? So you can just double check, make sure everything is good to go.
I have a question.
Yep.
How many canisters does the RF usually carry with them on the ride?
That's a question for Reed. I would say if you're carrying CO2, carry at least 2.
No, I'm not carrying any. I'm asking you.
You know where CO2 works really well?
Okay, so we've inflated our tire. What we're going to do now is we're going to take what's called the valve nut, which is the part that we took off the tube before, and we're just going to screw that guy back in. That basically holds the tube or the valve from rattling in the wheel, so it doesn't create as much noise.
That too, do you always do that afterwards?
Yeah, you can put it on before just to help, like if you have let's say you have a hand pump and you're going back and forth, it prevents the valve from going up and down, so that'll also be a good thing to do as well. I usually do it after because I've never really encountered in many scenarios where it's a big issue for me to actually hold the valve properly. And then if you have a cap, you can put that on as well. We don't routed caps because they're just, all they do is just keep dust from gathering around the area, but if you have it, you can put it back on. And it goes without saying, if you're on the side of the road, clean up after yourself, you have your tube, find a garbage, put it in your back pocket of your jersey, don't leave it on the side of the road. So now we're going to put the wheel back in. Same concept, except this time, remember how we shifted down all the way into our last pot? Same deal, we're just going to take the chain here, and we're going to just line it up to the last pot. Just like that. and then the wheel's going to go right back in. And then if you had a through axle bike, remember where you put your axle, and then it just slides in, and it will, with 2 hands, screw back in. And then we're good. And that is a flat change. We're going to do it on another bike, and then we're going to get you guys to probably break off into some groups, and we're all going to have a shot at changing a flat.
If that really opposite, those people probably won't be together.
Yeah, let's do it from the one on the other.
What happened to road bike? Road bikes changing a flat is a task and a half. Just can't get the beat to settle in because the tire is so slim, right?
Not only that, the diameter of that will be bigger when you're squatting down. Get to the end.
You have to have nice glutes and nice core.
Or you have to have OnStar riding with you.
Or buy Jeep or courtesy vehicle for another bike change, you know?
Oh yeah, just change the whole bike.
You made it. Yeah, made it.
Yeah. Where you brought it?
So why don't we break off into groups of 3? Should be 9 of you here. 10, okay. 3 and then a group of 4.